Thank you, Roman. I really do mean that. You've been a wonderful asset to the Department of Health, and you will be a wonderful asset long after I'm gone now. So, you all heard that I spent a lot of time at the Department of Health, and that's where I got my start in marijuana. But I'm just curious, you don't have to show your hands, because I know this, but at least 5 of you read this agenda and said, what is somebody from the lottery doing talking about marijuana to a bunch of judges? Yeah, I know, it looks funny. But this was a large part of my life for a long time, and I can't seem to let it go, and I wouldn't even if I wanted to. So here's the deal, I have notes, and then I have to look at that. I can't see my notes with these, so they're gonna come on and off. Before I start, a few caveats. What I am about to say is entirely my own thoughts and opinions. And there's gonna be a lot of opinions, okay? They are not the opinions of the Secretary of Health, certainly not the Director of the Lottery, because I don't even think he knows I'm here today, and not the Governor of the State of Washington, even though I will be talking about all of them at some point, probably. Second, I'm going to use the term marijuana. There's 2 reasons for that. First of all, I grew up in the 80s, and we all said marijuana. It's hard to have it to break. A lot of people think that that's a pejorative term, and I respect that, but I'm going to say marijuana. The second reason, probably the more valid reason, is if you read the marijuana statutes, they all say marijuana. That's the word that's used in the law, so I think it's appropriate to use it. There's only 2 times when the word cannabis is used in the law. And first of all, the Cannabis Patient Protection Act, which just talks about marijuana. And then when the legislature changed the Liquor Control Board to also encompass cannabis, or marijuana, the LCB felt very, very strongly about keeping their acronym, because we love our acronyms. So rather than becoming the Liquor and Marijuana Board, which would require them to change everything they owned, they became the Liquor and Cannabis Board, so they can still be the LCB. Third caveat is, thankfully somebody set this up for me this morning, I will use humor. It's a tough subject. I think everybody in this room probably knows somebody who's had a serious illness that either was or could have been helped by the use of marijuana. I respect that. I am not anti-marijuana, I am pro-regulation. That's a very different thing. But I've been working in this field for more than 10 years now. I have had death threats, for real. I have had vandalism to my house, vandalism to my car. I had one particularly lovely gentleman who kept posting Craigslist ads for me as a prostitute. If I couldn't laugh about this, I would have quit a long time ago, seriously. So there's gonna be some jokes, there's gonna be some humor. It doesn't take away from the subject, it just kind of shows my experience. And finally, no, I do not know what the winning numbers for Saturday's $400 million Mega Millions drawing is. It's the #1 question I get asked. Trust me, if I knew the answers, I would abscond with the numbers and the money, and you'd never hear from me again. So, with all that, let's talk a little bit about marijuana. Okay, on with the glasses. So, marijuana is of course not a new topic, but when it first hit the legal scene in Washington was 1998. It was a people's initiative passed in 1998 as I-692. It was the second in the country. California was first in 1996. As with many initiatives, it was written poorly, without a lot of thought to how it would actually be implemented. It essentially granted 3 things: an affirmative defense to criminal prosecution, and thank God you're a room full of lawyers and I don't have to explain what that means. So an affirmative defense to criminal prosecution for qualifying patients and their primary caregivers who possess no more than a 60-day supply of marijuana. 60-day supply not being defined in any way. We'll talk more about that later. What it did not do is it did not authorize commercial production or processing, sales or other transactions for consideration. So basically it says you can possess your 60-day supply, whatever that is, but how you get that is your own problem. It didn't provide for any regulation or any type of government oversight. So it was law enforcement, enforcement actions, and that's it. No government oversight other than that. It did not authorize the right to use medical marijuana. Nobody to this day in the state has the right to use medical marijuana. And it didn't provide legalization or arrest protection for patients or their caregivers. And that's really an important fact, because as we move through this timeline that we're going to talk about, marijuana for medical use wasn't legalized until 2016. It was always illegal with an affirmative defense to criminal prosecution. Checking notes. Okay. So along the way, there were some changes to the law before we get to what I would call the modern state. There was, first of all, in 2007, there was a bill that passed the legislature that asked the Department of Health to do two things. First, write a report about how exactly patients are supposed to get their marijuana if there's no sales or transactions or no commercial production or processing. And second, define what is a 60-day supply. Now that was a hard one, and the reason that was coming up a lot, we have prosecutors who were, they would bust a grow and the person had 250 plants. And they would be prosecuted, and the defendant would say, but that's my 60-day supply. And they would have some medical professional come in and say, well, based on my medical judgment, that's a 60-day supply. And then the prosecutor would have their expert come in and say, well, that's ridiculous, that's not a 60-day supply for anyone, it must be diverted into the black market. And judges and juries were having a really hard time with what is a 60-day supply. So, comes to the bill passed in 2007, and enter Christy Weeks into the marijuana wars. We had a long and drawn-out rulemaking process to define a 60-day supply. We read reports, we listened to experts, we listened to the stakeholder community, the patients, the caregivers, doctors. We listened to everyone, and in the end, we did what states often do. We just did what Oregon did. Because frankly, there is no such thing as an average 60-day supply. It depends on how the patient ingests the marijuana, how serious their condition is, what their tolerance level is. We're not talking about alcohol, where everybody reacts basically the same. In terms of tolerance to alcohol. With marijuana, you truly build up a big tolerance after a while. So people could need more and more and more, whereas a naive user could use very, very little and have the same effect. So what we landed on there were 15 plants, because again, you can't buy it, allegedly at that time, and 24 ounces of dried plant material. Now, I have tried this as an experiment with potpourri, and 24 ounces of a marijuana-like substance is a gallon baggie stuffed full till it looks like a pillow. Okay, so that's 24 ounces. And that was meant to be a 60-day supply. And that was my entry into this funness. We'll just call it that, funness. A few years later, in 2010, the legislature passed another bill, and unlike the prior bill that I talked about, I was already in for this one. I knew about it. I had no idea what the magnitude of this bill would be. I don't think anybody did, except perhaps the people that initiated it. But this was a bill to allow additional healthcare practitioners to authorize the medical use of marijuana. It's not a prescription. It is not now, and it never has been a prescription, because a prescription has strength, dosage, route of administration. You go and get it at your Walgreens or your Rite Aid. Rather, an authorization is what used to be a doctor, a medical doctor, an osteopathic physician, saying, I have examined this patient, I have discussed this with them, and I believe that they have a qualifying condition, and there's a list of qualifying conditions that has changed over the years, but there's always been a list, and that they may benefit from the use of marijuana. So only MDs and osteopaths for many, many years, until 2010, could write those authorizations, and there were relatively few of them. Doctors and osteopathic physicians were not comfortable with this because marijuana is not something that was taught to them in medical school. They didn't have marijuana representatives coming to their office and teaching them all about the benefits of marijuana and why they should authorize marijuana like pharmaceutical reps do with other drugs. So, and then there were also some federal law issues that we'll talk about later. So they were pretty hesitant to do that. And there weren't a lot of authorizations being written, and this was all just kind of a, quiet thing. In 2010, the law changed to add some new practitioner types who could authorize physician assistants, advanced registered nurse practitioners, and most importantly, naturopaths. Naturopaths are all about nature, natural remedies, herbs, all the things that speak to marijuana. And although we don't know this for scientific fact, some of what I say is just going to have to be anecdote because we didn't have data, this is when the real bubble burst in terms of the normalization or the outing of the medical use of marijuana. We had a lot of naturopaths who were willing to write a lot of authorizations, and they were opening up little clinics where they did nothing all day except write authorizations for $250 a pop. And there's still some to this day that do it, and Department of Health very kindly prosecutes them because that is not appropriate health care. We've also tightened up the law a little bit since then to say that you can't just do authorizations for your whole practice. And then in 2011, in the legislative session, Senator Cole Wells, who was the champion for marijuana issues all through her tenure in the Senate, brought a bill that would create the regulation of medical marijuana. The licensing of retail stores, producers, processors, may sound familiar if you're at all familiar with the current system, would have required a registry of medical marijuana patients. And that's important because we didn't have one. We had never had one, and at that time, and up until 2016, we were the only state that had laws related to the medical use of marijuana that didn't have any kind of a patient registry or database. We call it a database because a registry is a bad term. So we call it a database, but it's a registry. I used to get calls. I will always remember I got a call from a researcher at Johns Hopkins. Come on, this is like huge. And we're talking, and Christy, how many medical marijuana patients do you have in the state of Washington? Whoa. I had no idea. We could guess. We could extrapolate based on other states. We could, yeah, we'll just say guess. We could guess. But we had no absolute idea. So this bill comes along in 2011 that would have created the registry, the licensing, the production, the processing, all under the careful eye of state workers, various agencies, including the Department of Health and the Department of Agriculture. I don't think the Liquor Control Board was involved at that time. It also created a little thing called collective gardens, because patients, this would have legalized the whole system for patients if they were registered in the database. then this would make it all legal for them, arrest protection, the whole 9 yards, and they could grow legally. But a lot of patients would say, I'm too sick to grow, or I live in an apartment, or I have small children at home and I don't want them to see, my weed plants growing, whatever. So one of the things that was suggested, put into this bill and passed kind of at the last minute, it was not in the original bill, was a collective garden idea, which was, according to Senator Cole Wells, in her own words, supposed to be a pea patch idea. Where neighbors could get together and maybe one neighbor has a little piece of land and another neighbor has horticultural skills and another neighbor has some seeds, and we will all work together and we'll grow our 15 plants. And there was a limit of how many plants could be there, no more than 10 patients and 75 plants at any one time. And there were rules, you had to have all the patients' authorizations on the wall and their driver's license. There's all these rules about collective gardens. So the bill passes. And after it passes, but before the governor signs it, this was Governor Gregoire at the time, the assistant U.S. attorneys for the Eastern and Western districts of Washington, Western being Jenny Durkin, we're all familiar with that name these days, sent Governor Gregoire a letter saying, if you sign this bill into law, we cannot guarantee you that we will not go out and arrest your state employees that are letting this happen, or aiding and abetting even by regulating. It was me. I did not want to go to federal prison. I am not made for prison, trust me. So Governor Gregoire did a very creative veto of the bill. She vetoed, we all know you can't do a line item veto, you have to do a section veto. So she vetoed this section, but not this section, and this section, but not this section, which ended up as a big fat mess. Because, for example, she left in the section that said medical use of marijuana is legal if you're in the database, well, the registry. But she vetoed the registry in another section. So if you actually read the veto message in the bill, we can all figure out what it says. But if you don't like what it says, then you can read it and say, oh, it's gray. It's gray area. We don't know what to do, so we're going to do whatever the heck we want. And they did. So out of that collective garden provision, no more than 10 people, no more than 75 plants, came what I call the Green Cross stores. Remember all the Green Cross stores? Remember you used to see Green Cross stores everywhere, unless you live under a rock somewhere? Yeah, they were everywhere. By the time that we finally got this mess straightened out, somewhere around 2014, again, they weren't licensed, they weren't regulated, so there wasn't a list of them anywhere. There's Christy going through phone books and Google and trying to do a hand count. We estimate that there are 1,400 illegal medical marijuana dispensaries, collective gardens, acting in the state of Washington. More than there were Starbucks at the time. And if you are a native Washingtonian, you know there shouldn't be anything more than Starbucks in the state ever at any time. So, and they had all kinds of creative ideas, Well, we have 10 patients, and then one person comes in, makes their donation, gets their part of the harvest. They leave, and then they're not part of the collective anymore, and then the next person comes in and they are. And then pretty soon they stopped even pretending that it was a donation, it was just money, and this is what it costs. And it became a multi-million-dollar industry. Hence, when Christy personally, single-handedly tried to rein all this in and get some regulation, hence the death threats, because Christy was shutting down an illegal multi-million-dollar industry. So, those were some things that happened in between the passing of the medical initiative and 2012. Oh, hey. What's that? Oh, okay. I think I talked about this a little bit. What is the role of the healthcare practitioner? So medical doctors, osteopathic physicians, which are DOs, physician assistants, naturopaths, and ARNPs can authorize the medical use of marijuana and discuss the risks and benefits for the patient, sign an authorization form, testify in court if the person is prosecuted, and they're, are expected to educate themselves about marijuana. They don't. But no healthcare practitioner can legally dispense or administer marijuana, and there's a federal case specific to that we're going to talk about later. Okay, so I forgot that slide was in, we'll just move right in. So then 2012 rolls around. And who remembers Initiative 502? Passed in November of 2012. Keep in mind, this was 18 months after Governor Gregoire had vetoed the Senate bill that was passed, and it allowed adults age 21 and older to possess up to 1 ounce of marijuana or equivalent amounts for edibles, liquids, and tinctures or topicals. If it's obtained from a state licensed system of private producers, processors, and retail stores. Sounds remarkably familiar to what just got vetoed 18 months earlier. The biggest difference in this bill was that it was written after the style of the liquor laws. It was regulated very similarly to how Washington regulates liquor, and therefore the authors believed it would be a really good idea to put this regulation firmly within the Liquor Control Board, which became the Liquor and Cannabis Board. Some of the hallmarks of the legal marijuana market, there's regulation and enforcement. Maybe not as much, okay, maybe too much regulation for some people and not enough enforcement for others, but there's an element of both. There's seed to sale tracking. And why is this important? I don't know if it's important so much as it's damn interesting. If you go to a retail store and you buy, say, a chocolate bar that's infused with marijuana, it'll have a barcode on it. And the LCB could scan that barcode and tell you exactly what plant that marijuana came from, or plants, and where it was grown, when it was harvested, and what plant that plant was cloned from, and what plant that plant was cloned from, because nobody actually grows from seeds anymore, it's all cloned. I mean, it's fascinating. Given the resources, the time, and the effort, it's a very tightly regulated system. There was also testing and labeling requirements. This was like rays of sunshine coming from heaven for me, because in the medical world, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, there was no such thing as testing and accurate labeling. I'm like, whatever. But these products were required to be tested. The LCB and their rules decided that they would be tested for potency, because that's what everybody wants to know, is how much THC, that's what gets you high, and how much CBD, that's what doesn't get you high but may have medical benefits. Those are the two things they require to be tested. Mold, foreign matter, and moisture content. Oh, yeah, got it. Okay, so what they didn't require testing for is pesticides or heavy metals. Now, they have a list of what pesticides can or cannot be used, and if you're accused of using a bad pesticide, they will test you and see if you were using it, but there's no routine testing for pesticides or heavy metals. They had serving size limits. What is a serving size of marijuana? It's kind of like, what's a 60-day supply? It's like nobody really knew. Our initiative was passed on the exact same day as Colorado's, the exact same day. So they were not first. I would never let them say they're first. We're tied. But they had a highly regulated medical market. So they got their recreational system up and running and sales starting a lot earlier than we did, because they had a system to build it on. So once again, when we didn't know what a serving size should be, what did we do? We looked at Colorado. So it became 10 milligrams of THC. CBD is not psychoactive. There's no serving size for that. You can have as much as you want, whatever. But THC, they limited it to 10 milligrams per serving. Now, you can have more than one serving in a package. Say you buy a candy bar. Candy bar can be scored like a Hershey bar, and each scored section can have 10 milligrams for a total of 100 in a package. But the serving size just has to be very clearly delineated. There are also product restrictions. So can't have anything that's especially attractive to children. Not things that are attractive to children, but they have to be not especially attractive to children. Because that's what I keep saying, we have chocolate bars. Chocolate bars are attractive to children. Chocolate bars are attractive to adults. Yeah. Chocolate bars are good. Cookies. So there's no way they were going to say no to that. But there is a 3-person group at the LCB that sits around all day and looks at applications for new product types, and there are so many. You would not believe what people want to put marijuana into. Seriously. But some of the things that they have turned down as being especially attractive to children, powdered cocoa mix, cotton candy. Everybody needs to be in their cotton candy. And my personal favorite, pot ramen. Which is top ramen with weed in it. Except who eats top ramen? Okay, college kids. And 3 out of 4 college kids are probably under the age of 21. So these are the kind of things they said no to. They also said no just right off the bat to certain things like no gummies. And that was a big hit because in the unregulated market, everybody wanted their gummies. But no gummies. And then taxation. Of course the state's going to get some money out of this. Now the original initiative, which again is written by people who don't implement the laws, they just have ideas, was actually quite horrible in their taxation. What it did is it did a 25% taxation, excise tax. We're not even talking about sales tax, we're just talking about excise tax. At every level, when it transferred from the producer to the processor, 25%. And then the processor to the retail store, 25%. And then the retail store to the ultimate user, 25%. Okay, this is a lot of money. But the problem was, and I am not a tax lawyer, no. But the problem, as I understand it to be, was that because marijuana retailers or processors and producers cannot deduct business expenses on their federal tax returns, they ended up getting double taxed for this. They were getting federally taxed on tax they had to pay to the state. And it was really creating an unfair environment and causing a lot of financial headache. That was changed a few years later. Initiatives can't be amended for 2 years, so it was 2 years later it was changed just to be a flat 37% excise tax from the retailer to the patient, plus sales tax. Okay. So, because I generally represent the Department of Health, not really, don't tell them that anymore, I want to talk a little bit about what the impacts to the Department of Health were. A certain percentage of the tax revenue was allotted to the department to create and maintain marijuana education and a public health program that contained a public health hotline, grants for local health departments, other local community agencies, and media-based education campaigns separately targeting youth and adults. So there was other tax money given to other agencies like DSHS for treatment, which would probably be HCA now, but Department of Health doesn't do treatment, so we got the educational component. Now, as I keep saying, and I'm going to keep saying until it's not true anymore, this initiative wasn't written well, because what it said was, we will get a percentage, 10% of the excise tax that comes in, except the legislature has to allot money to us in advance. So we didn't know what 10% was going to be. So they used that as an excuse, no offense intended to the budget writers, to basically underpay us every year. We do not get even close to 10% of the excise taxes, but we do, I believe we got $19 million for the current biennium, which is not bad. Just checking. So these are just a few shots from a couple of our educational programs we've had. We're going into our fourth one now. The very first one was actually cobbled together before we got any money because, again, we didn't start getting this money until sales began. But sales didn't begin until almost 2 years after the initiative passed. While the rules were being written, the system was being set up, people were being licensed. So as soon as it passed, people were like, what are you doing to educate our youth now that all the horrible effects of marijuana are raining down upon us? So we worked with DSHS and some other agencies, cobbled together what I basically call budget couch change to put together the first Remember What's Important, Forget Marijuana for teenagers, because we figured that was the most important group that we could reach right away. We also have put on a program for adults, how to talk to their children. That was another early one. And we worked with UW and other agencies to put together a really robust training program. And I'd like to think that it's worked a little bit. It's hard to tell exactly. And kids have always used marijuana. Kids are always going to use marijuana. But we were all holding our breath, literally, last March, 2017, when the 2016 Healthy Youth Survey results came out. So every 2 years, the state of Washington surveys kids in grades 8, 10, and 12 about different habits, drugs, alcohol, exercise, just, it's a wide variety. And 2014 results, we didn't have sales yet, so nobody thought that was too indicative of whether or not kids were using more or less marijuana because of legalization. So in 2016, the results were from the time period where legalized sales had begun. And we're all waiting like this to see if youth use, am I saying that, went like this. Whoa! Worst case scenario. It didn't. That was a win. It went just like this. So kids always have, kids always will, but it didn't go up. So we thought that was a win. Pretty happy with that. But here's the problem. We got our stores up and running July 7th, 2014. Not that I'll, remember that day till I die. But we got our stores up and running, bringing in some money. It was, not right away because only a few stores were licensed at first. And then we got more stores and more stores and more production. So it caught up eventually. But we had a licensed, regulated, taxed system where things were labeled, tested, safe, consistent for people who want to go get high. And then we had an unregulated, untested, unlabeled, un-everything, and untaxed medical market competing side by side. Because keep in mind, it was not and still isn't difficult to get an authorization. So if you wanted your gummy bears, or you wanted your 500 milligram brownie, or you didn't want to pay excise tax, because when this legal stores first opened, prices were high. You just go get an authorization and boom, you're a patient. So those stores were continuing to rake in the bucks. Now, we've all established they were illegal, unregulated, blah, 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 blah. So you may ask, why was this allowed? Why was this even happening? Well, because it was tolerated. Because the only person or group that had enforcement ability was law enforcement. They have other things to do. They don't want to be the people that go in and take marijuana from kids with epilepsy or people with cancer. They have rapes and murders and serious things to do. Now, that was mostly Western Washington. Eastern Washington is a little bit different. They were a little more serious about things over there. But, you know, but generally speaking, there wasn't a lot of enforcement. And two groups of people, besides me, were pretty unhappy about that. First of all, the legislature, because they saw all that tax money just waving goodbye. But the new group, the interesting group, were the new licensees. And they were like, hey, forget that they were like illegal in the illegal system 2 years earlier. We'll forget about that for now. But they jumped through all the hoops, they paid the money, they got legal, they got licensed. They were doing everything they needed to do, except quitting the pesticide thing. And they were being penalized because people who didn't have to do all those things were opening up right next door to them and taking all their money. So, we found a champion, Senator Ann Rivers, the center, down by Vancouver, who was sufficiently offended by this. And she introduced a bill in 2015 that would have created regulation of the medical use of marijuana for the first time ever. A single system of licensed production, processing, retail sales, the whole 9 yards. Excuse me, it was 2014. It didn't pass. But not to be a quitter, we came back in 2015. Usually it takes 3 or 4 years to get a good bill through. We did it in 2. And in 2015, we passed the bill to create alignment, to create a single system, because the system was working. I mean, some people hate it, but it works. And the important thing of this was to keep in mind that there is no clear line where this is medical and this is recreational. And here's a line, and they are not the same. Marijuana is marijuana. Now, there are different strains. There are different ratios of THC, CBD, and the other 80-some cannabinoids that are contained in marijuana. But it's all pretty much the same thing. And I've talked to people, I've talked to a lot of people, but I've talked to a little old lady on the phone who smokes Trainwreck because it helps her glaucoma. Okay? And I've talked to recreational users who smoke Trainwreck because they want to melt into the couch after a hard week on Friday night. It's the exact same thing. Okay? So there was a lot of push to let's create separate systems. There should be licensing for medical and licensing for recreational, and there should be medical stores and recreational stores. Why? So when the bill that passed created a single system, and I still think it's the best idea, and that was to go into effect on July 1st, 2016, which means all those Green Cross stores had to shut down by then, which was panic-inducing to them and me. Consistent testing, labeling, and product standards. So the people that are using it for medical get the same standards and quality as the people using it for recreation. And most importantly, from a public health standpoint, there are specific requirements for patients under the age of 18. So you might look at me and you might say, Christy, what do you mean requirements for people under the age of 18? Weren't there always? No, there were not. There was nothing in the original law or any amendment to the law that ever addressed children. And so what we had, quite unfortunately, was a situation that was noted in the New Yorker magazine, 2013, 2014, where a writer had come out to Seattle and observed and wrote that a teenager with a skateboard and a medical authorization was the new golden ticket. Because, wrongfully believing it was legal, this 15-year-old could possess 24 ounces of marijuana, 15 plants. And what do teenagers do? They make bad choices and they share with their friends. And share, and share, and share. And there was no requirement for parents to acquiesce or even know about it. There was just nothing. There was nothing about children. So the 2015 bill actually created specific requirements for children who are medical patients. and it requires the more frequent evaluations by the healthcare provider. It requires patients to agree to their child being a patient. It required parents to be the keeper of the marijuana. Child is not allowed to go around with their baggie, their cookies or whatever. The parent must be in control of that. Children cannot grow. They must have a designated provider, caregiver, that does that for them. And they must be in the registry. Oh yeah, because we got a registry. Yay, we finally got a registry. And it's voluntary. For everyone except children. Children and their parent or guardian caregivers must be in the registry. For everyone else, it is sadly voluntary, but it was the only way it was going to happen. So some of the goals of our of alignment is to clarify what is meant by the medical use of marijuana. People mean different things by it. Allow tax breaks for medical marijuana patients who are entered into the database, the registry. So if you are entered into the voluntary database, you have a card issued by the state of Washington, you don't pay sales tax. You still pay excise tax. It's not as horrible as it sounds because the average price of an ounce of flower in a store today, including excise tax and sales tax, is still about 60% of what it was in the unregulated medical market before. So it's still cheaper, and yet people complain. Provides protection from arrest and prosecution for patients who are entered into the authorization database. So we finally got that legalization for people if you're in the database. And better protect patients by regulating medical marijuana products to ensure a safe, consistent, tested, and properly labeled supply. So no more of these. These are real products. There were real trademark lawsuits, trust me. But what I want to point out, and I'm going to walk over here, so I'll grab this. What I want to point out once you get over the funniness of it, is these two delicious cream-filled sponge cakes, according to this package, which may or may not be true because there's no testing or labeling requirements, has 1,000 milligrams of THC. 1,000. A serving is 10. That's 1,000. Now, I am not going to stand here and tell you that anybody ever died from a marijuana overdose, because they haven't. As far as I know, you can't die from a marijuana overdose. I think I read somewhere you have to eat your body weight. Okay, challenge. But 1,000 milligrams for an adult, or God forbid a child, or a dog, will cause some really nasty, nasty effects. It is not fun. If anybody has heard of the Maureen O'Dowd effect, she went to Colorado when sales first went on, and she thought, I'm going to eat some candy bar. And she ate some, and then she waited 5 minutes and said, I don't feel a thing. And then she ate some more, and then she ate some more. And I think she, in total, ate 100 milligrams and ended up curled up in the fetal position in our hotel room for 2 days. It induces paranoia, racing heartbeat, sweats, nervousness. There have been a few cases of deaths related to marijuana, but not because the user died of an overdose, because the user got out of control and killed somebody else. But we can't technically count that. It's not an overdose. So no more of these in the new system. But from a public health standpoint, and I don't care how long I'm at the lottery, it's drilled into me totally against my will for the rest of my life, this was more important. And this is a picture I took. So, no copyright problems. I took this. This was in a medical marijuana dispensary in Tacoma on 6th Avenue before the alignment. So this is when it was still unregulated and illegal. If you look at this envelope or this baggie right here, it's a baggie of Bugles that has been sprayed with marijuana oil. There's also goldfish crackers and some kind of fruity cereal, some pretzels. They've all been sprayed. So I'm in there, I'm talking, I talked to a lot of people because as we were planning this law, I wanted something that would work for as many people as possible. So I'm in this dispensary and there are 3 people working there that day. And purposefully, I got each one alone, held up the same baggie and said, "What's in here?" There's nothing marked on that, nothing at all. And from each of the 3 workers, I got a different answer. And it was basically, "Well, what do you want it to be?" Okay? And that was medicine. That was being sold as medicine. And God only knows where those baggies came from. And God only knows where what was in those baggies came from. I don't know. But we can't have that. We can't have that and call that safe, and we can't have that and call that medicine. No. So, the law gave the Department of Health some tasks. We didn't get out of it unscathed, even though we didn't get the majority of regulation. We did get some things related to medical, because we're the Department of Health, and we're supposed to know about marijuana, I guess. So we were given 3 main tasks. 4, I think one's not in here, but I think it's important. One of the first things we had to do was create a standard authorization form. Remember I said an authorization is what a healthcare provider signs to say that they talked about marijuana with the person that has a qualifying condition and they may benefit from marijuana. There was no standardization for that. So what law enforcement was seeing, what people were seeing generally, was this wide variety of what an authorization looked like. Sometimes they didn't have the patient's name. Sometimes they didn't have a date. They very rarely had an expiration date. The only reason they'd have an expiration date is if the doctor wanted to make sure that they got another $250 in a year or 2. They were often handwritten by doctors, so who knows what they said. So the legislature asked us to put together a standard form so that every authorization form looked alike, which also made it a lot easier for when we were entering people into the database because we had standard information on all of them. But aside from that, which I'm very proud of, we were asked to put together 3 rule sets. The first one, and truly the hardest one, were rules for products that may be beneficial for patient use. In essence, they were asking us to define what is medical marijuana. Now, as I said earlier, and I have said to many audiences, many of them very hostile, there's no such thing as medical marijuana. It's marijuana. People use it for different reasons. The only difference between medical and recreational, aside from the strains and the TBD, I made that one up, THC and CBD levels, what defines it as medical marijuana is the intent of the user, really. So a lot of people thought, they have no trust in me, I don't know why, that these rules were going to say, if it's high CBD and low THC, i.e. it doesn't get you high, that's medical. And if it's a high THC, that's recreational. Boom, line, done, we're good. It's ridiculous. There's no science for that. There's no science for most of this. In the last few years, there's a little bit, but mostly we're making stuff up as we go. We're creating history. It's kind of exciting, very scary. So when I thought about what's beneficial for a patient's use, I should talk to patients. And I've been hearing patients for years. And I met with them and I talked to them, and the things that I heard most, aside from go die somewhere, was we want pesticide testing, we want heavy metal testing, and we need more than 10 milligrams of THC for a serving size. Because, I talked to a guy who said I need 250 milligrams of THC to get out of bed in the morning. And maybe he does. He's been using it a long time. He had a serious back injury. I'm not going to say he does or doesn't. And, some people put it nicely. Some people said, oh, you just want me to get diabetes from, eating 100 cookies a day. Really not my plan. Because that just creates a whole other set of public health problems. We wrote Chapter 24670, which are the products that may be beneficial for patient use. We call them compliant. We don't call them medical. They're not medical products because anybody can buy them, with one exception I'll talk about later. But what they are is they have enhanced quality assurance. So they are required to be tested for pesticides, heavy metals, and mycotoxins, which is a scientific thing of little bugs that will kill you. Since our rules were written, the LCB actually requires mycotoxin testing for all products because they caught on to that one. There's some additional requirements regarding labeling, safe handling, employee training. Truly, nobody cared about those. They just wanted the testing and the additional serving size. When it came to serving sizes, we agreed that there should be a higher serving size for patients. These are what we call compliant products anybody can buy, except the high serving. Because I figure if I'm a recreational user, I'm not a patient, but I want to go and smoke a bowl, and I want to make sure it doesn't have pesticides, heavy metals, or mycotoxins in it, I should be able to do that. So we made these products available to anybody, except there are a certain grouping of products that have 50 milligrams of THC per serving, or up to 50. It doesn't have to be exactly 50. But we thought, well, if these are going to be, beneficial for medical patients, they should be medical-ish-like. So the 50 milligram products are limited to capsules, tablets, tinctures, transdermal patches, and suppositories, because that's the thing. So if you need your higher dosage, you can get it in those 4 forms. You cannot get a 50 milligram cookie, okay, because I'm trying to make this medicine here. This was the first compliant product that went on sale. It was unfortunately, it was a roll your own or pre-rolled joint of a strain called Durbin Poison. I really wish that hadn't happened, but it did. But yeah, that was me at the store taking a picture. I was pretty proud of it, but that's the symbol. It's kind of like, but it's not like, but it's kind of like organic. We don't approve these products. We don't ensure they've been tested. We set the standard. The producer and processor knows the standards. They attest that they are following the standards, and if they do so, they can use our symbol. If we find out that they're using our symbol wrongfully, they were reported to the LCB, who doesn't appreciate it, either the reporting or the action. Okay, the second thing, yeah, I had to think about that one for a minute. The second rule group that we put together is creating a new profession, because we love our professions at the Department of Health. When I started there 15 years ago, we had 56 healthcare professions. When I left, we had 80-some. These are not a healthcare practitioner. See how it's bold in the bottom, not a healthcare provider. But what the genesis of this was, we had 2 conflicting situations, once again. Initiative 502 said flat out in the law that people who work in medical marijuana, in marijuana retail stores are not allowed to talk about the medical benefits of marijuana. It is not. It's in the law. It's never been changed. That's just how the law was written by people who shouldn't write laws. So they are not allowed to talk about it at all. Now, on the flip side, over in the unregulated illegal medical market, we have people who would, and I am not exaggerating, I'm prone to exaggeration, but I'm not exaggerating now, you have to trust me. We had people who worked in these dispensaries who would say, smoke this 3 times a day, it will cure your cancer, don't go back to your oncologist. And I am not kidding, because I have screenshots of websites that actually said stuff like that. So, as I stated earlier, the doctors and other healthcare practitioners who authorize marijuana don't usually know a lot about it. There are a few that do, more now than there was. But they're mostly just writing them all day and collecting their money. So patients weren't getting any advice other than the University of Google, my own alma mater, and these horrible people at dispensaries who might even be trying to do the right thing but usually weren't. So what the legislature said is we're going to create middle ground here. We're going to create people who are actually certified by the Department of Health, who have taken a class. It's not an onerous class in any way. It's all starting to leave my head after 5 months, but I think it's 30 hours, and then you take a test. And then you can become a certified medical marijuana consultant, and you can advise consumers in your store. You can't hang a shingle, you have to work in a licensed store, that's a rule. You can advise them about what products may be beneficial for them. You can't practice medicine, you can't give them medical advice, but you can say, hey, if you're looking for something that will help you sleep, this might be a good choice for you. And then finally, the rules for the database. The database was required to go live on July 1st, 2016. It went live on July 1st, 2016, just by this much. It was a scary day. I was in Las Vegas that day. I was still stuck in my phone. Please just happen. Please happen. So what happens is you have your authorization. Your authorization is your affirmative defense criminal prosecution. If you just have an authorization. If you want to be in the database and have full legal benefits, be able to have a card, not pay sales tax, not be arrested, and grow a few more plants that way. We'll talk about that in a minute. You can take your authorization into a retail store with medical endorsement and medical marijuana consultant, and they will enter you into the database, print you a card. It costs $1. The legislature set that. I would not have set that. We are losing so much money on this database, but that's what it is. I think partially because it's voluntary, so only about 17,000 people have signed up out of the I don't know how many there ever were because we didn't have a database. But one of the interesting things about it is it allows us to get some data. Remember that data I've never had? Like, I always thought that for sure 99% of authorizations were written by naturopaths. I blame them for every bad thing that ever happened. And I was actually wrong. They do a lot, but it's actually only about 54%. And MDs are catching up, which was quite surprising. We also found out that the #1 condition is intractable pain. Keep in mind, intractable means it can't be fixed by other things. People forget that part, and they just think intractable and chronic mean the same thing. There's nothing I can do about that, but it's not. The 76% of our patients are entered into the database for intractable pain. I knew pain was going to be first. What surprised me is that the number wasn't higher, because in Colorado, which has a very similar demographic as us, and in terms of their laws and their registry, they're at 94% for pain. I thought we'd be higher than that. So that was definitely the highest number, and then followed by cancer, wasting diseases, PTSD, and epilepsy, which all had 7% or less. There are twice as many males as females. It was not surprising, just based on data from other states. The thing is that there aren't a lot of card holders, and they don't buy a lot. So in the first 8 months, I did a count, and there was only $4.3 million in sales to people with cards, which was a drop in the bucket. But what was interesting is what were they buying? Because these were patients. These were patients that had their authorization, cared enough to go and get a card. I consider these to be a pretty legit group here. And I had heard so much about how they juice, how they use tinctures and things. They don't want to get high. I heard this and heard this and heard this. But almost 63% of sales to the card holders was flower, usable marijuana, smokable. 25% was concentrates, which are really, really, really concentrated oils that then they can vape or smoke. 8% were edibles, and 3% were other product types. Now, because this was a rather laborious project, I didn't keep doing it, but that was for the first 8 months. Card holders, if you have a card holder, you do not pay sales tax, which is between 9 and 10%. You do pay excise tax. If you have an authorization, but you do not have a card, you're on the hook for excise tax. and you're treated just like any other recreational user, including you have to be 21, and you're limited to that 1 ounce or equivalent, whereas a person with a card can get 3 ounces or equivalent. Never seen anybody ever buy that much, and I've just looked through sales transactions for months on end. Nobody ever actually buys more than 1 ounce at a time, but if you talk to the patients before, during the bill making process, they would all say that, you know, if we limited them to 1 ounce, they were going to die. One of the things we heard a lot is, you know, if you shut down the stores, the unlicensed, illegal medical dispensaries, nobody's ever going to go to a state store. Nobody's going to go to a 502 store. Those are horrible. Those are horrible. They have terrible products. They're weak. They're full of pesticides. Because medical marijuana is grown in fairy dust and fertilized with unicorns sprinkles. Okay, so they were never going to go to these stores. But yeah, I'm gonna. So this is February of 16. So we're closing down the stores as of July 1st. So March, April, you know, these are the recreational stores. They stay pretty even. And then we hit June. It's like, huh. And then July, huh. And then we go on to August. So what this shows is we did have an influx of new consumers into the legal stores. You know, it's anecdotal, you know, coincidental, but what it tells me is that these were people that were going to the illegal stores, and despite their protestations, were now going to the legal stores, which was a good thing. So why do we even still have marijuana? I get this question a lot. Medical marijuana. So we have marijuana because people love it. But why do we still have a medical marijuana program? Why does it still exist? Well, there's still concerns over federal drug policy. Attorney General Sessions has said many times that he's going to bring down the hammer of the federal government on marijuana. It hasn't happened. It doesn't mean it couldn't. Just they have other things to worry about. It provides access for patients under the age of 21. There aren't a lot. Last I looked, under the age of 18, we had 57 children registered. It's not a lot, but for those 57, it could be making a significant difference. And then patients on the database, they have benefits. They can purchase 3 times what a recreational user can, purchase without sales tax. They can grow more plants and participate in cooperative grows. Cooperative grows, I swear, they will never go away. These are not collectives. These are cooperatives. They're entirely different because there can only be 4 patients and 60 plants, so it must be different. The big difference, honestly, is they have to be registered with the LCP, and nobody wants to do that. So there are less than 20 of them across the state. And local jurisdictions can zone them out, and many have. So there really aren't that many. But let's talk about growing plants for a little bit. There are 9 states and the District of Columbia that have recreational marijuana laws. Every single one of those jurisdictions, except the state of Washington, allows recreational users to grow between 3 and 6 plants per household. It's a plant, you know. It's hard to tell people you can't grow a plant. It's pretty easy to do. Washington said no. Recreational users, you cannot grow plants. It was not in the original initiative, for which they are still sorry to this day. And there's been many, many bills introduced to allow recreational home grows, and it has never passed. And it's going to be a real tough sale. So the only way you can grow in this state is if you are a patient. So that is a big driver until that changes. If you have just your authorization, which is affirmative defense to criminal prosecution, you can grow 4 plants. If you're in the database, so we know about you and we track you and watch you and spy on you, you can grow a presumptive amount of 6 plants. But if your doctor says you need more, they can authorize you up to 15. So somewhere between 6 and 15, depending on what you can get out of your doctor. Those first few months in the database that I told you I did the hand count on, about 48% of people had the presumptive 6, about 48% of people had the maximum 15, and then there was this little smattering. There was like one guy that got 11. Why? I want to know. I want to call that doctor and say, why 11? That would be rude of me, so I haven't. So, here's a question. What's a plant? We talked a lot about plants. You can have 4 plants, you can have 6 plants, you can have 15 plants. You can have 60 plants with your buddies. What's a plant? So this is a picture I took in a legal grow. It's great lighting. Somebody took a picture of me with a plant. It's like the best picture ever taken of me because of the lighting. I recommend it to everybody. That's my Facebook picture. These plants are grown under artificial light, and they can control the height and when they bloom and when they are ready to be harvested. And they let these plants grow between 3 and 4 feet. And then they start dimming the lights periodically until that tells the plant to bloom. And that's the end of the life cycle. One of these plants, on average, will grow about 4 ounces. Again, they're on tables, but they'd be about that high. So that's a pretty average indoor grow situation. This is somebody's backyard. I did not take this picture. I was just telling you. You can look at the house for scale, and those are plants. So you get 4 plants. Are they the other plants? Are they these plants? Are they these plants? Again, I did not take this picture, but my buddy, who's an LCB enforcement officer, did. That's one happy farmer. That's one plant. People ask me, Christy, how much usable marijuana can you get off that plant? I have no idea, but it's a lot more than 4 ounces. So we talk a lot about plants. You have this many plants, that many plants. That is a terrible gauge. So, because we're all lawyers in CLE, I'm going to talk a little bit about law. It's the least fun part of this whole part. Take a nap now. So, this is a sentinel case in the federal courts, 9th Circuit, so it applies to us, in 2002. Right after California passed their initiative, and doctors in California started writing authorizations, the federal government declared that the action of writing an authorization is not consistent with public interest. And they sent a letter, DOJ and HHS sent a letter to practitioner associations and licensing boards saying, if your doctors are writing these, they're going to lose their DEA licenses, and we might come in and criminally prosecute them. And plaintiffs and physicians sued to enjoin enforcement because they felt it violated First Amendment rights of the patient-doctor relationship. And the court held that the government couldn't restrain free speech between a practitioner and a patient. And that included recommending, authorizing, whatever word you want to use, the medical use of marijuana. But they said very specifically that it stops its speech, and including the written speech of the authorization. If the healthcare practitioner takes any affirmative step to provide marijuana to the patient, then that is a violation and they will be enforced, or either through the DEA licensure or through criminal action. And that is still good law. Cannabis Action Coalition versus City of Kent. So this is post-2011. This is when that collective garden business started in 2011, and the City of Kent zoned out collective gardens. They just said, no, we're not going to have them here. And the plaintiffs in this case had a collective garden, and they sued. And I encourage you very much to read these cases because I'm simplifying for time. But basically what they said is that City of Kent, you cannot prohibit through zoning something that is legal in the state of Washington. Now remember, this was the bill that Governor Gregoire vetoed heavily. And if you ever want to read a case about the meaning and the interpretation of gubernatorial veto, this is the one. Because that's really what it came down to, is an analysis of what the intent was. And Division 1 held that neither the plain language of the statute or the governor's intent supports a reading that the bill legalized collective gardens. Because as I said, it said collective gardens are legal if you're in the registry. But nobody could be in the registry because the registry was vetoed. So it's a very, very interesting case. State versus Reese, this was a criminal case. Pretty classic situation, cops just wandering by and happened to notice a bunch of pot plants on Mr. Reese's patio. And they went and got a search warrant saying that they had evidence of manufacture of a controlled substance. They found 37 plants, 211 ounces, and various growing and sales paraphernalia. And he moved to suppress the evidence, claiming the search warrant wasn't supported by probable cause because law enforcement had never determined whether or not he had an authorization. Because if he had an authorization, then it was legal. The court held that despite statutory language indicating legislative intent to decriminalize possession of marijuana for medical use, the final statutes only provided an affirmative defense. Again, it all came back to what the meaning of that veto was, and the veto meant that you could it was only legal if you're on the registry, and there could be no registry. And so it set the standard that law enforcement does not have to check, this was pre-16, did not have to check to see whether somebody was an authorized patient before determining their probable cause to investigate growing of plants. This is a recent one. This is gun. Christy, what's this gun thing? What's the gun thing about marijuana and guns? I get that question a lot. So, federal law criminalizes possession or receipt of a firearm by an unlawful drug user or person addicted to a controlled substance. That's anybody. No, don't raise your hand, but in your mind, raise your hand. Who's gone to Cabela's and bought a gun? Okay, I have. And they ask you, it's one of the questions, a standard question. Do you use or are you addicted to a controlled substance? Do you use an illegal substance or are you addicted to a controlled substance? And you press no and you move on and you get your gun. Well, seriously, that's what happened. Miss Wilson, Rowan Wilson, this was a Nevada case, but Ninth Circuit. Miss Wilson was a very well-known, in a very small town, because you know how that happens, marijuana advocate, and she was on the Nevada registry, and this was a well-known fact. And she went in to buy a gun from someone who knew her. It was a dealer who had just recently received a letter from the federal government saying, do not sell guns to marijuana users, people. And so he said, look, I can't sell you a gun. And she sued, and the theory of her case was that it was a violation of her Second Amendment rights, and the fact that she was on the registry for Nevada doesn't equate to the actual use of marijuana. So I just have a card, doesn't mean I'm a user. And the court held that, yeah, they didn't buy it. So the government has a substantial interest in preventing gun violence. Wilson did not have a constitutionally protected liberty interest in simultaneously being a registry card, having a registry card and purchasing a firearm, and it was eminently reasonable to assume a registry card holder is likely to be a marijuana user. Now, the interesting thing about this case is the patients made a big fuss about it, but it is a reminder that it is not about the medical use. You know, having that card, yes, makes it eminently reasonable to assume you're a user. But this law applies to anyone who uses marijuana, even in a state where it's legal, fully legal. Ms. Lynch did eventually move from Nevada to Washington, so she's my stakeholder now. Yay. So, we do have some, if I have a couple minutes, I have a couple minutes left, yay. So we do have a couple of emerging issues that I wanted to share before we close up. They're not emerging so much as ongoing, some issues that have not been settled yet. The first one is the home grow issue. There will be a bill every year until infinity or it passes to bring home grows to the state of Washington. We'll see if it ever passes. There are a lot of arguments for and against. Another big issue is delivery, particularly for patients. The patient community says that, in some areas of the state, not in Western Washington, but, say OMAC, you have to drive a few miles to get to a marijuana store. There are stores everywhere, but they are more convenient in some places than others, and there are some people that have transportation or health issues that make it difficult to get to a store. So there's a lot of interest in delivery. Unfortunately, it gets muddied a lot because it's a pretty rational argument for patients, but then it becomes, well, what about tourists in downtown Seattle who don't have a car? Okay, you just blew it. You just blew it for everybody because nobody's really interested in taking care of tourists. So that comes and goes. The next one is also related to tourism, and that is social clubs or public uses. The law for both medical and recreational prohibits public use. This is not enforced. Walk downtown Olympia, walk downtown Seattle, walk anywhere and you smell it. And even the ones you don't smell, it's still happening because vaping, best thing about vaping marijuana, there's no smell to it. They take all the terpenes out, you can do it anywhere, nobody would know. But it's still illegal and it could be enforced. And we do have tourists who come in from other states and they're staying in a hotel room where they can't smoke. Now they could eat a cookie, but nobody wants to hear that. So there's a big push to create a social club or to allow marijuana use at bars or, some way to create a public use for it. We had a battle royale in the legislature. Seattle wanted it so bad, Spokane hated it so much. So it didn't go anywhere, but it will keep coming back and coming back. An issue that I was asked about a lot that has not been in the legislature because it's a federal issue, but it's an issue nonetheless, is the use of marijuana in healthcare facilities. It's federally illegal. You can't say that enough. Most healthcare facilities receive federal money. In order to receive that federal money, they have to promise that they will abide by federal law. But we have people in nursing homes, we have sick kids in children's hospital who use marijuana or want to use marijuana for medical reasons. And I get a lot of questions, or I got a lot of questions when I was at the Department of Health, and it was always, it's your discretion. Nobody's from the state's going to come knocking on your door, but we cannot say what the federal government would or would not do. One very interesting emerging issue is this last spring, the FDA did approve the very first whole plant marijuana drug, prescription drug. Like you go to the pharmacy and you take it. That's really exciting. There's been synthetic marijuana drugs on the market for years, like Marinol. They have not been met with a lot of success. This is the first drug that's made from a plant. So we will see how that goes. It is called Epidiolex. It's meant for children with intractable epilepsy. The studies and testing were good. It's for sale in England, and it's been very successful. But as marijuana becomes more and more mainstreamed as a medicine, what does that do to the recreational side? There's a lot of push. It's still a Schedule I controlled substance in the federal government and the state government. People always say, let's make it a Control II substance. Okay, well, if we make it a Schedule II controlled substance, it means you have to have a prescription and you have to get it from a pharmacy. You can't just go down the street to your local weed store and get a Schedule II controlled substance. So people have to be real careful about what they ask for. And that is all I had. And I'm pretty proud of the time. We do have 5 minutes, so questions? Yes?
What is the amount of tax money that the state has made over the few years that recreational marijuana has been legal?
I do not have the total amount. I can tell you that as of today, with the number of stores that we have and the stock that we have, in excise tax alone, not sales tax, we're making about $1.5 million a day. Okay, it's not going to fund McCleary, but people always say that. We have marijuana. Why do we have educational funding problems? It's not going to do that, but yeah, it's about $1.5 million a day, plus sales tax. Yeah.
I'm curious on this one, in terms of the uptick in physicians prescribing, do we think any of that at all is linked to the limits on opioid prescribing and docs feeling that they're constrained on opioids?
I don't, sorry, the question was, with the uptick in medical physicians authorizing marijuana, do we think that there is any correlation with the pressure on them not to prescribe opioids? And those two things are both very, very true. There are fewer opioid prescriptions, there are more authorizations for marijuana, and there are a lot of people who would say, without a lot of evidence, that marijuana is a reasonable substitute for opioids. But I can't say for sure that they are actually connected. I think that it's just coincidental as opposed to causal.
Okay.
Yes?
Isn't there money set aside for long-term research into the use of marijuana? That was part of the initiative.
The question is, was there research money set aside in the initiative? And there was. There's money that went to both UW and Wazoo. There's also a private researcher license that is available now through the LCB if you're a private researcher and you want to research, but you have to fund that yourself. But the money that went to UW and Wazoo is very slow to get that off the ground because, again, to do research, you have to handle the product. The product is illegal federally. They receive federal funding. So they've been slow to do that. But Wazoo, for example, is looking into creating a breathalyzer for marijuana. That's one of their projects that they're working on. But it is, unfortunately, a very small amount of money in the greater scheme of things. Yes?
Christine, have there been any studies that have looked at vaping amongst teenagers and use of marijuana?
The question is, have there been studies about vaping marijuana among teenagers? I am not aware of any studies directly attributed to that. I think right now most people are looking at vaping generally, or the device Juul that has become quite a problem. We do know that kids do vape it. We do know they've been caught in schools with it. In the Healthy Youth Survey, there was an indication that there was some vaping going on, but there hasn't been a study specifically on that. Okay, well, thank you all very much. It's been